r/NoSleep. Posted by u/Dwovar. My hometown has rules. Rule 2. The rules don't make a lot of sense if you're an outsider, but we don't get them a whole lot. We're not connected to a highway and none of the interstate roads pass through here. If you want to come to our town, you've got to do a lot of driving out of the way. I don't know, because I never cared enough to ask, but I'm guessing that's on purpose. Our high school teacher, Ms. Jaku, in our local history class mentioned that the rules used to end at the edge of town back in 1933. In 1961, Mayor Lincoln Haversham got the bright idea to move the whole town 6 miles east. It was only 300 or so people back then, she said, and the idea wasn't as impossible as it would be now. After 2 years and a few months of hard work, the whole town was now outside the old city limits. As soon as the sign was planted, people awaited 8:10 a.m. with their eyes wide open. Every single person with their eyes open suffered the same fate as my dad. Not that they all left, but they lost their eye, sliced clean out. Most of the people in town over 59 are missing one eye. Most of the people over 65 are just missing. The area where this town used to be is part of what we call the rules zone. Any new construction has to be in the original town area before it can expand elsewhere, to contain it, I guess. Now you might wonder about babies. I have. After all, they don't know how to do shit, let alone follow rules. I asked my dad about it once, when our neighbor had a baby. He just grunted and shrugged. I guess babies don't count? We teach kids the rules early so no one knows exactly when the rules start to count. The rules get drilled into you before you learn to read, and you're closing your eyes for the first rule before you're 2. I suppose we could do an experiment, but no one has the stomach for it. But, I know for a fact they count by 2nd grade. That was the day when Janasia Bartel and Freddie Jiang broke Rule 2. They were part of my class in a rundown school. Town saved that money for the operating room, and it meant other things didn't get paid for, under the tutelage of Mr. Morales. This is one of those schools where each room is a whole grade and you've got between 10 and 30 kids in each grade. Technically we have 2 schools, Winterson Elementary and Daycare, and then the normal one. Winterson's is a sort of office daycare disguised as a school for zoning and taxes. No one ever accused old maid Winterson of being dumb. Most of us go to the town school grades 1 through 12. I was surprised at college to find out even most other small towns aren't like that. I always assumed that was just part of small town life. Mine was a class of 12 kids, the smallest on record I think, so I got to know each of them really well and we all stay on contact. Well, mostly. No one hears from Freddie Jiang or Little Nance. We have suspicions Freddie broke the rules a 2nd time because we knew he broke them the 1 time already. We were there. Frankly, I don't know about Nance. Maybe she broke rules, but I hadn't kept up with her. She got into meth pretty hard after graduation and may have just overdosed out in the fields. A town like this can drive you to anything to escape, and meth is a problem everywhere anyways. Freddie Jiang and Janasia Bartel had made a bet one day about breaking the 2nd rule, or so I was told by Sam Upson a week later. The 3 of them had been tight though, so I don't see a reason to doubt it. It had been a series of escalating dares, the sort of dumb shit kids do before they're grown enough to want to touch each other under the clothes. Touch a slug, put a blueberry up your nose, fart in the middle of class sort of shit. Sam said it had been going on for nearly a week when Janasia came up with rule breaking. From 12:30 to 1 o'clock, a second sun appears in the sky in our town and makes everything colder. In winter it goes from freeze your nuts off to freeze your piss while pissing, and in summer it goes from hot to not so bad. Unlike the other things, the second sun is something the town is pretty proud of, and I think it's the reason the whole place hasn't been abandoned. It makes plants grow something magnificent. Crops grow a 1/4 inch every afternoon and flowers bloom even if they shouldn't. A lot of people think the price of not looking up while it's out is worth it. Probably not Freddie and Janasia though. They got it bad. Janasia called Freddie all kinds of chicken and declared she'd won and stuff, like little kids. Because they were little kids and because they were little kids, it worked Freddie up into breaking Rule 2 with her. I don't remember the stuff leading up, but they weren't really my close friends. Their biggest problem was going to be Mr. Morales, they thought. At 5'11" and 200 pounds of boxing muscle, he was a tough guy, aside from his memory issues and neck pain. I'm probably in the prime of my life while he's about 56, and I still wouldn't dream of taking him on. He's really great with kids though. So they made a plan and enlisted Sam to help. I think he feels guilty to this day. Sam was supposed to jump up and run to the back of class, shouting about ants in his pants. Because, I shit you not, that is the best plan a trio of 2nd graders could possibly come up with. Ants in their pants. Then when Mr. Morales was busy helping Sam with his ant problem, they assumed it would be easy to get to the window and look up. I hate to admit that it worked, but that was the same time in the 90s that fire ants were the next great threat to America. 12:40 rolled around and Sam jumps up screaming ants. Ants in my pants. And sprints to the back of the classroom. He had a flair for the dramatic, as I recall, shouting ants are biting my wee-wee. Still probably the funniest thing I've heard in my life. Janasia and Freddie made it so I don't laugh about it anymore. Mr. Morells fell for it hook, line and sinker. Drop and roll. He shouted, sprinting to the back, facing no one, scrambling to slap Sam's legs hard enough to kill ants but not to hurt the child entrusted to his care by the county. Everyone was dying either laughing or screaming about ants. Kids have impressionable minds. One person starts screaming about ants and half the class imagines hard enough that they feel them too. Those of us that were laughing stopped pretty quickly and joined the screamers. While Sam and the teacher were panicking, Janasia and Freddie sprinted to the window. It wasn't far. Freddie was right by the door and Janasia sat right behind him. They checked the clock, one of the old cheap plastic ones that was never on time. We ignored it and used the 8:10 bells for the first rule. Sure enough, it said 12:42. Both of them pushed their faces up against the glass I cast upwards. That's when the smell hit. That awful mix of acrid and meaty that is burnt human flesh and hair. It struck the whole class and dragged their attention away from Sam's antics to the window. Somehow it filled the class before the screaming. Smoke wafted up from Janasia's face as she yelped and began to scream. Freddie, I think, went straight into shock and just kind of fell in on himself, hewn face down on the floor, and I'm glad for it. But Janasia Bartle didn't. She spun around and flailed wildly, looking for something, the teacher to fix it, or the safe invulnerability of childhood. Shit, she probably just wanted her mommy. Whichever it was, she didn't find it. I could see the bubbling flesh and melting eyeball goop running down her left cheek. Black and brittle flesh cracked in hair-thin zigzags all through her socket, cloudy fluid weeping from each crack. Small blisters formed around the edge of her socket and swelled. She locked eyes on Sam, where Mr. Morells was staring with his jaw slack like a fish, in shock. The word cold escaped her lips, which shook Mr. Morells from his stricken state and into action. He wrestled her to the ground with more effort than he should have needed before shouting at us to get the doc. One of us, I didn't look at who, went sprinting out of the room while other kids took turns dry heaving or crying or, sometimes, both. Once Janasia was subdued, he bound her eye in a roll of gauze that I got him, on command, from the teacher's desk. Every couple of years, he shouted, "Some dumb kid." Janasia passed out shortly after and Mr. Morells tended to Freddie. It would be nice if it ended there, it really would. But the second Mr. Morells touched Freddie, he jumped straight up and did a weird shiver/tremble/seizure thing. He touched the empty socket which, just like Janasia's, was blackened, burnt, and starting to crack. The flesh came away completely, stuck to his fingertips, and started oozing what looked like overbaked blood. He whispered something about ice and started grabbing at his other eye, trying to pry his little fingers behind it. Mr. Morells snatched the arm away and Freddie screamed, flinging the burnt blood flesh goop everywhere. Mr. Morells, I'll give him credit, did not fall down and puke his guts out like I did. Some of it hit me in the cheek and it'd feel like fucked up melty ice cream, cold and sticky, and it left my skin with a tightness I hated. The feeling spread as it ran down my face, curving off the corner of my mouth, which immediately made my lips tingle in an awful way. Freddie and Mr. Morells wrestled for way longer than a kid should have been able to. But second grade Freddie kept howling in rage and switching between trying to rip out his other eye and fighting the old boxer. Out of nowhere, Mr. Morells clocked him in the jaw and we all heard the bone snap. Freddie fell back on his ass, stunned. Through his broken jaw he started talking in non-words. They all the sound and rhythm of real words, but they weren't. Maybe it was his jaw, but I talked to the other kids for the rest of the week about it, because how could a bunch of 6, 7, and 8-year-olds not talk about it, and everyone said they felt nauseous when Freddie talked. Like listening to a song backwards and sped up. No one in class broke a rule for the rest of their time at school. Janasia works at a local ice cream shop and seems pretty out there. I see her from time to time and she has a tendency to space out. She must carry a bunch of guilt seeing how, and again this comes from Sam, it was all her fault they played that stupid dare. She never goes to Downtown Donuts. I don't know if she's banned or if she just doesn't have the nerve to face Mr. and Mrs. Jong. I sure as hell wouldn't. Freddie hasn't been seen for years and we, everyone from that class, think he broke another rule. Whether it was one purpose or not I dunno. He acted pretty normal when he came back to school a week later. Maybe it was just shock he suffered, having his eye burned out at such a young age. Maybe it was something else. I think it was something else. I've never heard a person talk like that, broken jaw or no. I still think of all the rules, number 2 is the worst because it holds the town here. I think if it weren't for the other sun making plants grow so well, this place would be deserted and I would have been born somewhere normal. I haven't seen many people break the rules, but I've never seen someone go wild like Freddie Jeong and Janasia Bartel. Most people just crumple up in pain or cry for help. The closest I've seen anyone come to that level of mania was the eagle conservationists that came through here in the late 90s, but I think that's a story for later. Hell, I feel nauseous right now thinking about second grade. That's why I'll never break rule 2, don't look at the second sun.